Distinguished Chairperson, dear Secretary General, welcome to the panel on putting people first towards people-oriented transparent mobility. Thank you very much for being here with us as MAROF, Marmara Urban Forum. WRF as International Institute, its Turkey office was established in 2004 to work on sustainable solutions. As director of the Turkey office, I will chair this session today. We'll talk about Turkey today. The population of Turkey is 82 million, 90% live in the cities. As this number increases, number of problems we see in cities increases. One of these problems are transportation problems. We'll talk about this issue today in our panel. We'll talk about people-oriented solutions and to come up with a sustainable solution with the unsustainable situation that we have today. During the session, we will leave room for your views as well. We'll conduct a questionnaire and we will ask you 3 questions in this questionnaire. One of the questions is the most problematic issue in sustainable transport. What is it according to you? And second question is sustainable transportation. What's the most important solution to that problem according to you? And in terms of problem and the solution of the problem, which stakeholders should contribute to its solution? Please answer these questions. And as was mentioned in the first panel, when you go to the app of MAROF, you will see the questionnaire link and click on that link and try to answer the questions as the panel goes on. Please, at the end of this panel, I will get all of the answers and I will share these with you. Now I'd like to leave the floor to the keynote speaker, WRI, Global Office, Sustainable Cities, Global Director, Dasgupta. Dasgupta.
Thank you very much, Güneş. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry I have to speak in English because my Turkish is terrible. So I hope the translation works. I actually wanted to talk about cities and how cities change. You heard this morning session, the 4 mayors, all of them were talking about transformation and change in cities. And what I want to talk about is how I think cities are going to change for quite a bit, fundamentally, because how we move in cities is going to change in the next 10, 15 years, all over the world. And this changes will happen, is happening already, because of significant shifts of technological change taking place in mobility. So my talk is about how the shift is going to take place and what can we do to make sure this change that is about to come is good for us as people and also good for the planet. So you must have seen everywhere in the world now, there is discussion about future mobility. From talking about shared mobility, talking about electrification, talking about automation. And you've heard all these companies. There's companies in Turkey, companies around the world, global companies that are mostly, as you can see, are actually companies that are sharing of automobile and cars and trucks, cars and scooters and other things. But this is everywhere. You can see this in the news, you can see this in technical press, but you can see it in normal press. But the point I want to make, this is a research work we did a couple of years back, that this change that is happening in mobility is not just sharing. Across the world, you can see across the world, changes taking place, not only of how mobility is shared, just like Uber or Zipcar or any of these things, but also how we use mobility, how we can go to a city, take out our phones, and we know how to whether we should walk, we should take the metro, or we should take a car. All these different kind of technologies are coming in place, and this is happening all over the world. This change. The chart here shows how fast Uber and Lyft actually was introduced in the United States. But just recently, last few years, if you can see the map on the other side, which is e-scooters, which is also introduced in the United States, it's actually exponential growth. These things are happening much faster all over the world. And it's not just happening on rich countries and rich cities, it's happening all over the world. This is actually a map from matatus, which is informal minibuses in Nairobi, and a team actually took this with the city and mapped all of them on their cell phone. So you could take out your cell phone and you now can know where different matatus are going. You could not know that before. So these changes are taking place everywhere simply because cell phone penetration is actually everywhere. It's not just global north. Korea has the highest number of cell phone penetration per person, and one of the very terrible data points is that in India today, and I think this is true, I'm not sure it's true, people say there are more cell phones than toilets. And that's not a good data point. But the penetration of cell phone is enormous, and there are soon going to be more cell phones in the world than people. But these changes that I'm talking about is going to happen mostly in the cities in the next 15 years, where cities are growing. This is a map that shows where cities in the world are going to grow in the next 15 years. The green large dots are where the growth is, and the red dots are cities that are stable or shrinking. And as you can see, that the most of the growth in the world, urbanization, will happen in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Asia. And 2.5 billion more people will live in cities than they today. Today, there are 3.5 billion people live in cities. So there's an enormous growth that is taking place, will take place in cities all over the world. But the growth of the future growth is actually quite concentrated in two areas, simply because Asia and Latin America, the urbanization has already taken place. They're already at 60, 70% or 75% urbanized. The interesting thing that's going to happen going forward, that these cities that are growing are not just the largest cities in the world. The medium-sized cities also will grow. Actually, most people that the 2.5 billion people that are coming will be in cities that are not there today, will be in smaller cities. So these three technological changes I'm talking about, one is data, which is cell phone driven, which is already happening. All of you, I think, use data to access your transportation, whether you are actually in shared transportation or you're trying to figure out when the next bus is going to come. All of you use that. The next is electrification, the electrification of mobility. That is happening, not happening as fast as we think, but it's going to happen very fast soon. People predict that electric vehicles, electric cars, will be as same price as a internal combustion engine price, somewhere between 2027, 28, or 29. At that point, when it becomes the same price, I think adoption of electric vehicles will be much faster than it is today. Because in performance right now, there is actually very little performance difference in electric vehicles and ICT or internal combustion building. And the third one that is going to change, which is not, I don't think is here in Turkey, is automation. Automation of mobility, that a vehicle is able to move without a driver. This is, when this will happen is not very clear. I think there are a lot of technological pushes going on. People predict will happen in 10 years, 15 years. It depends a lot on the city and its infrastructure. But the point I want to make to you is that if we start using data in a large way, which we already are, if our mobility gets electrified and at one point mobility gets automated, this will not only change mobility, but there is a very significant chance it'll actually change cities. But think about it for a minute. Congestion today is a very big problem in most cities, including Istanbul. And if you had an automobile that you didn't have to drive, and it was electric, so it didn't really cost very much to drive it. You came to work, and the parking cost you a lot of money. And you did not park your vehicle. You just let it rotate around the block for the 8 hours you were working. This will just enormously increase congestion, then actually reduce it. Or, for example, you live today hour away, and you think hour and a half away is not bad because you don't have to drive back to work. And you can just do work while going to work and might actually cross sprawl. So the chances of these technologies actually changing mobility, but not only changing mobility, but how to actually changing cities and making them either good or bad, depending upon the choices we make. So my talk is really about what are the choices we have to make sure that these technologies actually help us do these things better. Because the evidence today, so for example, the only study that's been done for Uber and Lyft, how it affects mobility, has done for New York City. And clearly in New York City, the transit passengers who used to take transit, which is their subway system, are not taking transit, they're taking Uber and Lyft. This is not good for the city. This actually raises congestion, reduces quality of air, and actually increases greenhouse gases. However, that's not the only way it needs to be done, but that's what's happening right now. Similarly, the whole thing about car ownership. When Uber and Lyft came, people thought car ownership will go down. Actually, the evidence is right now, it's not clear that's going to happen or not. I don't know what the evidence for Istanbul is. Some places, car ownership have slowed down among younger people, the younger people from 25 to 35-year-old who buy their first cars. Similarly, you can see the others of carbon emission, sprawls of city. All these different indicators can actually become better if we manage this transition that's supposed to come, or worse, if we don't manage it. So, in our team, Güneş talked about our center, the Roth Center. We've been asking ourselves, what is it that we need to do to make sure this transition that's about to come, which is driven by technology, which will happen if we didn't do anything or because it's driven by the market. What can we do to make sure this transition actually is good for us and good for planet? This picture is a good picture to remind us. This is a bicycle sharing service in China, not sharing service, bicycles from a sharing service in China, where the bicycle itself is actually quite inexpensive. So there was an oversupply of it, as you can see, and when it's poorly managed, it created a very big problem of oversupply and waste. But that's not the only outcome there is. When bicycle sharing was implemented in Washington, D.C., where I live, the city actually asked 6 different bicycle companies to test for 6 months. They got the data, figured out how many bicycles they needed, and then they deployed it. So people learn from these things, these kind of evidence, and there are ways to figure it out how to do it better. This is what we did, and I want to share with you 6 ideas we have come up with how to manage this transition better. The first one, the most important one, I think, is not to think about movement and mobility, but to think about access. The difference in access and mobility is the following. Mobility is the idea of going somewhere, or moving. Access is the need for you or someone, any one of us, to go to the thing we want to do. Meaning, how the connection between me and my house and my job, or the hospital, or the school, but the need to go to somewhere. So that the idea of access is connecting the location of where things are, where our homes are, where our jobs are, to the idea of movement. How do we move? This basically makes the how we move part agnostic, which we should choose the best way to move. Most research shows that if you can get someone to their work or wherever they want to go in 30 minutes or less, they're okay with it. It doesn't matter actually which way, whether it's a metro, is it a car, is it walking. When it becomes more than 30 minutes, people start wondering whether they should do something else. So access as a driving force of thinking about cities and how people should move actually helps us a lot. And the new data okay, don't count my time. This is not working. Is there someone? Thank you. So this is an example. I hope that thing is working. It shows that if you take access, this is an example from Turkey, actually from İzmir, of a new line. And as a new line is put, you can see in 45 minutes what happens to access and how much more area actually becomes accessible because of the line. Similarly, Data across the world, big data now, because we have such access to data, it allows cities and city leaders to think about access very differently. I'll show you an example from Mexico, and this is the city of Mexico, the blue part of the Mexico. This is the city where the richer people live, and the red parts are where poorer people in Mexico live. And I'll show you some examples of what you can do with data and idea of access. This is a map that shows job, 28%, the richer part of the city has 28% times more, not percent, times more access to jobs using public transit. And the interesting thing in Mexico is the richer part of Mexico City, which is true for most cities in the world, actually don't use public transit as much. You can do the similar thing for healthcare. 113 times the richer part of the city has access. You could do this map for any city in the world, and my judgment is, depend on how good access in a city you can come up. This is for education. You could do it for public spaces. So that is the idea of access. The second idea is that most cities in the world actually have a formal system of mobility, mass transit, other kind of things, which is in the picture below. But they also have a pretty significant part of informal transit. And in Global South, if you go to any Indian or African city, it's a very significant part. And now a new mobility, which I shared you before, which is shared mobility and other mobility that is driven by data. Right now, these three things are managed very differently by three different systems. Our suggestion is how to make these three things work together will be the next revolution, how we manage mobility as a one wholesome system. An example of this is in Sao Paulo, Brazil, where the blue part and the yellow part are two different city centers in Sao Paulo. And this is how people can go for walking. This is the distance if you combine walking with mass transit, and this is how much the city can be covered for the same amount of time if you'd use walking, mass transit, and new mobility. And in Sao Paulo, they're trying to actually manage these three systems in one integrated system. And this shows what happens if you add to car sharing. The other thing I want to point out, these new mobility answers are very good, but if it's a big city like Istanbul or any other big city, you cannot forget mass transit. You cannot move enough people fast enough that if you don't have mass transit of some kind. And the simple reason is the energy consumed in mass transit, whichever energy, whether it's hydrocarbons or electric, the per capita energy used for any mass transit is much faster. So it's the most efficient way to move people if you actually have a lot of people to move. The fourth idea I want to focus on is the data. Data is going to be critical for us to move mobility forward, whichever kind of mobility it is, whether it's traditional, new, or old. And data today is not democratically used, meaning that the most data that is used today, either it's a private sector or public sector, it's not shared. Data should be seen as infrastructure. Just like we see roads today, we have to see data of tomorrow. And the potential for use of data to make better decisions is enormous. That chart there of New York City and where people move in metro is actually done by a person from public data sources. It takes every station and shows throughout the day and throughout the week where people go. The enormous possibility of planning of the city and what to do about mobility from that data set is, as you can see, is an example. But all data is not the same. For data to be useful, it has to help decision maker make decision. Our judgment is cities need to think really hard about what data is available, what data should be available, and what data should be made public so other people can build on it. The last 2 points I want to make is streets. This is something, I just met someone right now who is working in Istanbul about streets. Streets is among the most biggest amount of public space in any city. And it's today, most streets in the world, if you take the top pictures, used for cars, which we think is the most undemocratic thing you can do to use cities' open space. And there are a lot of work going on across the world how to use streets differently. The movement is called Complete Street, has a different names, different places. It's actually how to make it useful for different modes of transportation, walking, biking, mass transit, cars, maybe a little bit. And the reason is efficiency. The amount of space a car takes, a single passenger car takes 25 square meter. And as you can see, in a bus, 82 people can go in the same amount of space. So when you have limited space, using a car is the worst, most undemocratic thing you can do. And there are ways to rethink streets, and we think rethinking streets can make a world of difference of bringing greenery, walkability, and biking and walking to streets. And my last point is that we have to really think seriously about changing mindsets, not just providing new solutions. Mindsets through economic means, through incentives, how to discourage car use and encourage other modes of transportation. And that can be, as you can see, that can be done through different kind of taxation. But as electric car comes, this also can be done a lot through how charging stations are deployed. So I hope as we think about charging stations for the future, we think about the city plan and where the charging station should be. If you put charging station next to the metro stops, for example, for filling areas, that might encourage a particular behavior. So there is lots we can do, we're not doing enough about, to think about what is going to happen next and how we can change behavior of people to embrace different kind of mobility that is good for the city and good for people who live in the city. This change is actually coming. And we think, it's going to, I'm just telling you all this, that cities won't change. It takes a long time for cities to change. Actually, cities change pretty fast, given the technology. This is a picture of New York City. I don't know if you can see this. It's full of horse-driven carts. And the year is 1900. In 13 years, this is a picture of the same city 13 years later. And there's not a single horse-driven cart here. It's all automobiles. Because, cleaning horse shit is not a good thing to do, and people thought cars were much better technologically. And because technologically it was so much better than horse-driven cars, this shift took place like that in 10, 15 years. What I'm trying to tell you is that kind of shift is about to come. And I actually think, personally, in 2019, United States cities did not make the right choice. Because cars and big cities is actually not a good mix. At that time, it seemed like a good choice. And we have a similar choice right now. This shift is coming. Well, the question is whether we're going to make the right choice, and we should learn from this, towards making a city, that new city, that is actually much better for people who live in it and the planet we live in. So it's up to us, but we have a chance, because this change hasn't yet happened yet. It's happening. And it's a chance for us to get it right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Güneş.
Ani Bey konuşması için çok teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you very much, Ani, for your presentation. Now, I'd like to invite the mayor of Konya Metropolitan Municipality, Mr. Uğur İbrahim Altay. He's going to talk about a bicycle-oriented approach to Konya's transport systems. Good afternoon. I'm here to talk about my city, Konya. The thing we're trying to do in Konya can be summarized in 3 different groups. We analyze the existing situation of bicycle transport, encouraging people to using bicycles, and awareness-raising activities. When it comes to developments of using bicycles, Konya is one of the leading cities of the world. We have non-motor transport incentives. We have programs for reducing addiction to using cars, and we have a traffic demand strategy. These are the strategies and plans which were established for the first time in Konya in Turkey. We have protocol with the Ministry of Environment as well. According to our analysis, 2.3% of all transport activities in Konya is carried out by bicycles. But one of the most important data is that 80% of the bicycle users use bicycles for commuting or for going to school, for real transport needs. And hopefully, the share of bicycles will be at least 5% in the nearest future. I'm going to share with you some surprising numbers. We have 550 kilometers of bicycle routes. 320 kilometers of it is within the city center. Our population is 2.2 million and 1 million people live in the city center. The green lines are bicycle routes. In our emergency action plan, we are ready to build another 80 kilometers, and by 2030, within the city center of Konya, we will have around 730 kilometers of bicycle routes. Our approach to bicycle transit, our aims are to eliminate problems within the city center, to have a more efficient and environmental friendly transport system within the city, increasing energy efficiency, reducing carbon footprint, paying attention to social justice, and so on. We have a process for preparing the master plan for bicycle transit. This process began with accumulating data to understand the current situation, analysis of problems, developing strategies, developing recommendations, and preparing the preliminary projects for bicycle routes. We ran surveys among 1,900 bicycle users, and we also ran surveys among 500 potential bicycle users, and we analyzed the existing bicycle routes. Within 12 hours, in our busiest route, on a day, 2,400 people cross this route with bicycles. This is an incredible number. I'm around 45, and I'm from Konya. I know that people in Konya have been using bicycles for many years, and they still keep this habit. Of course, we have problems. To solve these problems, we analyzed them first, and we built 150 new bicycle parks. In the second stage, we started planning the new bicycle network. In our vision and strategy, we have a shared bicycle system, safe transport, innovative approaches, tourism development. By the way, Konya has a great potential for tourism in the city center. We annually receive 2.8 million people just to visit the Mevlana Rumi's home, and we work on other topics in our bicycle network strategy as well. This is another project which is to build extra routes for the existing network. Currently, we have 320 kilometers of existing bicycle routes. In our emergency action plan, we have extra 80 kilometers more. The objective is to increase the number of bicycle routes within the city center, because this is where people would like to use their bicycles the most. And in the mid-run, 135 kilometers, and in the long run, 134 more kilometers will be added to the road, and by 2030, the entire network will be around 786 kilometers. When you promote bicycles, you have to come up with solutions as well. You have to provide integration with the other networks. We have 168 stations for the light rail network, transfer stations, 48 bicycle stops for the public bus networks, and other additional transit and integration networks have been planned. We want to also build digital screens so that people can have an idea about the traffic within the city. On the mobile phones, we will have an app for navigation system, park space capacity, the network situation, transit stations. So we're working on building this app. Within our city center, we have 500 bicycles for share in 40 stations. We're planning to increase the number of stations to 80 and the number of bicycles for shared use to 1,000. This system is very popular, especially among university students. As I mentioned before, Konya is a very important tourism destination. We're planning to have a bicycle network towards our touristic destinations as well. We're planning to organize thematic bicycle tours and seasonal bicycle tours to several resorts like Gökyurt, Çumra. Çatalhöyük is a World Heritage destination. We're planning trips to the tulip fields and other nice areas around the city. This is one of the daily tours. It starts with Sadrettin Mosque, which is shown by number 1 on the map, and it will end at a church at number 14. So you will be welcomed at your hotel with a map of this route, and you will be guided as well. Almost 90% of all tulip production takes place in Konya. For this reason, we're planning to organize seasonal tours where people can visit tulip fields. It will be 55 kilometers. When you're building bicycle roads, you also have to provide people with some symbolic infrastructure. This is a crossing, and our aim is to build the first bicycle boulevard in Turkey. We have this Fethi Street. It's 9 kilometers long, and this will be dedicated as a bicycle boulevard, bicycle street. So it will be a route for bicycles only and a private route for bicycles only. It looks very nice actually, as it is, this street. We were planning to build a tram in the middle of the street, but we dropped this plan because we're building a subway. So the middle of the street is going to be built for bicycles now. It's a 9-kilometer boulevard for bicycles, and the plan is ready. Hopefully, we will put it into practice very soon. And this is how the junctions will look like for that network. I mentioned this junction where 2,400 bicycles cross every day. It will look like this. And Alaaddin Boulevard is one of the most popular streets. We have solutions for bus transit and bicycle transit for this route as well. We are aware that this is not going to be an easy process for us. Although we have a tradition of using bicycles, we have this culture. Just like in every other city in Turkey, the car users are still think that they are the dominant players on the street. So we're trying to build awareness among car users, among students, employees, women, and we also plan to include university students and academics to this awareness-raising project. We're planning to organize many different events whereby people will come together with their bicycles. There will be races and some contests like orienteering, where people will solve problems by using their bicycles. Finally, I'd like to talk about this project which we implemented last year. We distributed 44,400 bicycles to children who came to mosques, and children are very happy about this, and they're very willing to provide further efforts. So in my presentation, I tried to summarize how strong we have as an infrastructure in Konya, but of course we still need to build further. For this, we need an action plan, and very harmonious and intensive efforts are ahead of us to make Konya a city of bicycles. Hopefully by 2030, Konya will be an exemplary city for the rest of Turkey with a network of 780 kilometers of bicycle routes. Thank you very much for your attention. when I see interest on your side, actually, I'm becoming more encouraged to do more for my city. Thank you very much. I hope I used my time effectively.
Sayın Başkanımıza da değerli sunum için teşekkür ediyorum.
Well, thank you very much for this valuable presentation. Now, I'd like to invite Deputy Secretary General of İzmir Metropolitan Municipality, Mr. Eser Atak. He's going to talk us about what they do in their city for bicycle networks.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you very much, Güneş. Dear Mayor, hello to you, Ms. Dani, and hello everyone. Well, I would like to extend the greetings of the residents of İzmir to the residents of Istanbul. I'll talk about the metropolitan city of İzmir's perspective toward transportation and what our projects on passengers mobility and bicycle mobility. Well, within 10 minutes I'll try to do that, hopefully. Well, as Ani said, transportation, it's closely linked with transportation technologies. 100 years ago, when you look at the cities, 100 years back, the scales of cities were quite small, and pedestrians accessed everywhere by themselves. But now the use of cars spread, and the boundaries of cities, they grew, and they spread, and the built environment has increased. So, as leaders of cities, we are trying to bring about solutions to those current problems that we are faced with today in cities. How does this work? Well, transportation alone, per se, it's not an issue, actually. Well, what kind of life do you want in a city? It's you answer this question by way of transportation. Transportation is a right of residents, because in public life we have cultural, social, relations, and we go to work, employment. All of these city life activities, they are affected by transportation. So you reach places via transportation and engage in your social life. So there are many opportunities which should be fair and equal to everyone. So right to transportation should be based on equality and justice. Well, there is the traffic point perspective toward transportation. It's wrongful. Well, because cars cover 90% of space, and they only transport 30% of people. And buses carry 70% of people, although they occupy 10% of the space. So that's hence the problem. I mean, we are making streets larger. We are having these junctions, expanding the junctions, and but this approach has been abandoned by the West mostly. We focus on mass transit, passengers, pedestrians, and bicycles. Well, sustainability in transportation is an important principle of ours. What is sustainable in transportation? There's three components, and the environment is one component, the other is the economic component, and a social component. When we say environment, we talk about release of gases that have a negative effect on the environment, and reducing the use of fuel. And as the transportation network increases, a city the space increases. So economic sustainability means use of energy and minimizing dependence on energy and sources. And for social sustainability, we have to accessibility for everyone, access for everyone, and affordable at affordable prices. That's what we mean. So the social aspect is an important aspect in that regard. So these are principles, the principles that guide us at Izmir Metropolitan City. So these are basic policies. To transport people, not cars, we should disseminate mass transit. We should restrict car access in the central areas. We should support policies focusing on pedestrians and bicycles. We should manage demand and traffic. We should have a more balanced and a highly accessible transportation system in its place. In mass transit, we should have renewable and clean energy options, and more of these options. And the first e-bus fleet was introduced by us. We were one of the first to do that. So transportation is a fundamental right, especially in central districts of the city. They should be accessed by pedestrians more, not by cars. So pedestrians should have a priority there. And the children should be able to walk safely, and more bicycles should be used in cities. And accessibility is important. Logistics around these subjects and planning around these subjects is an important policy. So what have we done so far for sustainable transportation? Izmir has a transportation planning history going back 1970s. So we carried out many studies and surveys since the 1970s. We have a transportation master plan for 2030. The infrastructure works are going on. So we have a bicycle action plan, car park logistics action plan, pedestrian action plan. So we have several action plans underneath this. Smart and rational approaches have been introduced. These are our goals. I will skip those. Well, bicycle transportation. This is one of the principles in our master plan. And looking at the topographic structure of Izmir, doesn't favor use of bicycles, and not as much as Konya. We have our flat surfaces limited. We're starting with the coastline. We have a network close to 62 kilometers bicycle lanes. We are trying to disseminate or expand this network as soon as possible. This is our target. 92 kilometer is the short-term target, and a total of 248 kilometers in the long run. So total target is 405 kilometers bicycle network in Izmir. Hopefully we will achieve it. So this is another, Eurovelo. We wanted to be part of the European cycle route network. We applied. The pre-qualifications are finished, are over. We'll hopefully join Eurovelo soon. So the European Mobility Week. We're carrying out several activities within this week. 5 years ago, we started carrying out these activities for the first time. It is spread all over Turkey now, which makes us happy. The Turkish Union of Municipalities is pioneering the European Mobility Week, and we celebrated it in many cities in Turkey. Mass transit, bicycle, importance of pedestrian walking in the city, and was emphasized. These are some of the pictures from this activity. We have every month a day to cycle to work. On Monday, the mayor is actively using his bicycle himself in short distances. Instead of his official vehicle, he goes to places with his bicycle. And this is about children, so to encourage the use of bicycles. So it's a habit. It's starting at childhood. So if you make sure that they use the bicycle when there's young children, we would kind of encourage bicycle use, and it will become a culture in the end. So otherwise it will be difficult to make a culture out of it. So this is the pedestrian master plan. So we have many pedestrian zones in areas in İzmir. We are one of the pioneers of pedestrian zones in Turkey. Konak, Alsancak, and Karşıyaka, Bornova on the other side. These are pedestrian zones, and we would like to increase those pedestrian zones. They cover 58.81 hectares, and the pedestrian axis is 6.19 kilometers. So these are pedestrian prioritized areas. 513 hectares is the envisaged target for the future within this master plan. This is about accessibility. So we have a comprehensive program on that. Everyone using wheelchairs, people carrying stuff, and children, elderly people, everyone is covered in this accessibility program. In the trend to improve, we need to improve the transportation networks in that regard as well. So, while doing all of this, we have embraced a participatory process. We have meetings and workshops participated by NGOs of the city and all transportation-related organizations. So we take their views as well. So last but not least, this is 3 sites: Pergamon, Ephesus, and Smyrna, ancient cities. 3 important attraction points from İzmir. You're kindly invited to visit our city. Thank you very much.
Sayın Genel Sekreterimiz Eser Atak Bey, teşekkür
Mr. Secretary General, Eser Atak, thank you very much. Now, I'd like to invite Rory Nuijens, the Innovation Attaché of the Consulate General of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, to Istanbul. He's going to talk to us about Amsterdam as a city of bicycles.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. Yes, I'm going to show you some examples from Amsterdam, but I must say the examples from Konya look as impressive as the ones from Amsterdam, so I'm very happy with that actually. If you think about urban mobility in the Netherlands, you probably think about bicycles, because that's what we are pretty known for nowadays. And I'm also happy to see that also in Konya and Izmir there's a big focus on the improvement of the bicycling infrastructure. Some examples of that infrastructure in the Netherlands. You see beautifully redesigned streets that cater to pedestrians and cyclists, and even you see a cycling highway very similar to the one that they are going to develop in Konya. But I'm not going to talk a lot about what these infrastructures look like. I'm going to talk about the benefits of cycling and walking. They provide more space in cities. You have cleaner air compared to cars. Because of the movement, you have more healthy citizens. And actually cycling and walking are much more social ways of transporting yourself. Because you are in more contact with each other during your mobility. Because of that, I'm also quite an active cyclist here in Istanbul. I cycle about 150 kilometers per week. Small part of that is commuting, big part of that is road cycling, because it's healthy and I like to do it. But when I tell to my friends that I cycle so much in Istanbul, they usually tell me that I'm pretty crazy, because Istanbul is hilly and it's warm, it's unsafe, and the roads are not suitable for cycling. It's basically the same crazy to do it. But I think the funny thing is that Amsterdam also used to be like that, apart from the hilly part. But all the rest is very much true for Amsterdam as well in the past. So this is Amsterdam around 30 years ago. Especially the plan on the left is actually a black mark in the history of Amsterdam. Basically, the plan was to demolish the center and put highways there. Luckily, they didn't go through with it, but that was the thinking back then. So in terms of mobility, we should transport people from A to B as fast as possible, and the best way to do that is by car. Well, at the right top, you can see that this was not true. Very similar traffic jams as you also see in Istanbul, and also on the right bottom, you see that the streets were designed for cars, not for people and not for cyclists. Amsterdam was actually pretty similar to what you see in other cities around the world nowadays as well, and also in Istanbul. But what changed? Why is Amsterdam now a good example of cycling? What are the underlying reasons? And actually, it's a societal movement that created that change. It is about parents that wanted their children to go to school safely, but also in a more autonomous way. So that people, 8-year-olds could go to school by themselves and not worry about their safety. And I think the underlying societal questions about mobility are quite important. Back then it was about safety, but nowadays it's also about climate change and about clean air. These are very good reasons to reduce car usage in a city and redesign cities so that they're more green and provide more space for bicycles and pedestrians. But it's not only that, you also need political courage, especially to reducing parking spaces in the streets and redesigning roads so that cars are actually the guests and not the main thing on the road. It also took consistent policy making to reduce that car usage in the city, and basically also a shift away from car-based logic in urban planning. And let me expand a little bit on that. Because it is still very prevalent in city planning that if you want to cater to more urban mobility, so more cars, you should make more parking spaces. That's also what we hear when we talk to municipalities here in Istanbul. But more parking spaces create even more cars. More roads create even more cars. And so this is not the solution. Because car usage is very inefficient, so they take up a lot of space, but they are hardly used. So a typical European car, it says there, is parked 92% of the time. That's a very inefficient usage of space, and also in a city like Istanbul, space is very precious and it's also very limited. So. Also, in terms of traffic accidents, we always talk in terms of victims. So what happened to the victims? In the Netherlands, most of the victims are cyclists because still they are vulnerable. But what if you talk about who caused the accident? Most of them are cars. You can see that 62% of the accidents most of the accidents are caused by cars, and cars are the reason why people are killed. So if you can change that discussion, and so not talk about cyclists as vulnerable and victims, but as cars as the reason of those accidents, you can get an entirely different discussion, and you can talk in entirely different solutions to those issues. So this is basically what our streets look like nowadays. Very little room for pedestrians, and the roads are dominated by cars. Also, I want to point out that picture on the right bottom, this is a new car developed by BMW, and there is no way that a person in that car can see that little person that's walking in front of it. So that's actually not a very good design, so to speak. And you see that more often in the bigger cars, the SUVs, that they are not catering to our most vulnerable road users, kids. So, this is about car-based logic. Let's also talk a little bit about the future in the Netherlands. So this is a picture of one of the biggest bike parking spaces that has been opened a few weeks ago in Utrecht. That allows people to combine their bicycle trip with mass transportation via train. So this park has capacity for 22,000 bikes, so people can go from their homes to cycle to the train station and then take further transportation by train. And this is, I think, the combination of these walking and cycling in combination with mass transit is really the future of mobility in the Netherlands. Also, as previous speakers pointed out, shared mobility. I think especially electric mobility and also automated driving only works in combination with shared mobility, because electric cars alone don't solve the biggest issue in cities, which is space. So you need to reduce car ownership by formulating shared mobility strategies. So in the Netherlands, we have several startups that are working on that, like Amber Mobility, that specifically caters to leasing agents. But also, people can pay 10 euros per month and share and have a subscription to a bike sharing service, which always guarantees a working bike for them. So the sharing economy is also one of the trends that we are following. So what are we doing as a Dutch Consul General? We are connecting knowledge and expertise on urban mobility towards Turkish organizations when they need that. Basically, we do that in the form of co-design sessions where we bring together Dutch and Turkish experts to talk about a specific topic. In 3 weeks, my colleague Attaché, who's sitting there, she's organizing a workshop about doing sports in the public space. Cycling, running, and how can you do that safely in the public space. We are also active in the knowledge and innovation community on urban mobility, of which Istanbul Municipality is also a part of. We just launched a collaboration between our national funding agency NWO and TÜBİTAK, which provides some funds for Dutch and Turkish researchers, also in the field of smart mobility, to organize some seminars and workshops and visits together. And we are also organizing public-private collaboration from the Netherlands to Turkey to connect that knowledge and expertise when that is needed. So, as a bonus, this is how it feels to cycle in Istanbul. This is my daily commute that I make from my home to work. I think the mayor of Konya and also the representative of Izmir are looking at it like it's a few years back in their own cities. But yeah, so this is how it feels to cycle in Istanbul. I think you can see that it is much faster than going by car. But it is quite dangerous. So you should only do it if you really want to. But I hope in the future we also have a well-developed system as Konya and Izmir have, so that we can also cycle in Istanbul to work. This is about 4 kilometers, so this is a perfect distance to use by bike. So, perfect in time.
Sayın İnovasyon Ateşemize hem güzel sunumu hem de bu...
Thank you to the Innovation Attaché for this presentation and the video. Now talk about global street design guidelines and what kind of practices they've did in public spaces. Program manager of NACTU, Mr. Abhimanyu Prakash, is kindly invited to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. All right, while they set up the presentation, what I'm going to give a little bit of a brief that I'm going to talk about something called the Global Street Design Guide, which is a set of guidelines and manual which was launched at the UN Habitat in Quito about 3 years back now at this point. And since then, it is a document which has been adopted and endorsed by over 100 cities and municipalities around the world. So I'm going to talk about the Global Street Design Guide and its applications today. But before I do so, we need to talk about why is this street design guide important, right? We're talking about putting people first, and when we talk about streets, we often talk about streets just as the platform to move. But when we talk about people, they do much more on streets than move. They play, they learn to ride, they often spend money, they earn money, they celebrate, they play music, they shop, they dine and perform on these many streets. These streets are places to relax, to enjoy some nature. And as Ani mentioned in his first presentation, they are the largest network of public spaces in our city. But this is what we have designed our streets to look like in most parts of the world, where pedestrians are struggling every day while going to school, while going to work, and the state for our disabled is even worse. We have to realize that streets serve many functions. They serve functions of mobility and access, environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, livability, and improve the quality of life. But above all, public health and safety. We know that over 1.3 million people are killed on streets all around the world every year, which means one person dies every 30 seconds. And just by the end of today, close to 3,000 people would be dead on streets around the world, of which 500 are children. But we know that these deaths are preventable, and we know what is to be done. And a big part of that is street design. The first piece is looking at speed. Speeds need to be lowered. We know from this graph that at 30 kilometers an hour, a person has a 90% chance of survival. But the minute we design our streets to allow for higher speeds, there is a greater chance of dying. Human bodies can only withstand a certain amount of force. And as much as all of us would like to walk around in these ironclad suits, the climate of most of our cities, including here in Istanbul, does not allow us to be walking around in these. So a bad design can self-enforce unsafe behavior, just as good design can self-enforce safe behavior on our streets. The second piece to look at is to prioritize sustainable mobility choices. We need to stop prioritizing and subsidizing cars in our cities. We have to make sustainable transportation easier, accessible, and affordable. And we need to make it easier not to drive on our city streets. As the mayor of Bogota famously says, an advanced city is not where the poor move in cars, but it's where even the rich use public transportation. And the Global Street Design Guide shows in graphical format some of the material that was shown in earlier presentations, that sustainable modes of transport are much more efficient than automobiles. This is the amount of space taken by 50 people to move on our streets. And just like Ani's presentation, we know that whether it's AVs or EVs, they're all going to take the same amount of space. So as he spoke about so many cities growing, do we want to continue to move people like this, or do we want to move them in a rather sustainable and a people-oriented manner? Data shows that the same street, when reconfigured into a multimodal street, can carry 2.5 times more people than a street just designed for cars. And this has been seen to have multiple benefits even on road safety, where we can see that cities with the least car orientation are much safer. More cycle lanes on our city streets, just like we heard from the city of Konya, means more cyclists, and that means a reduced risk for all users. And finally, the third big way to make sure that people don't die on our streets is to design streets that put people first. I'm here talking on behalf of the Bloomberg Initiative for Global Road Safety, where Michael Bloomberg committed $125 million to tackle this public health issue. We're working with the World Resources Institute and many other partners in several cities around the world. And under the leadership of Junaid Sadiq Khan, who was the former Transportation Commissioner of New York City, we produced what is the Global Street Design Guide. This guide is a supplement to a lot of other national publications by NACTO, which are for the North American context, and is currently being translated in several languages, and we are in discussion for a Turkish translation very, very soon. Of course, this guide is not an independent document. It builds off the expertise and the guidelines from several other international organizations and agencies, and was not just designed and authored by a team sitting in New York, but actually with representatives from 40 countries and 70 cities. It's a free download which was made available, and the idea to make it a free download and accessible to everyone is to inspire leaders like mayors who are here in this platform as a document, to inform practitioners, much like all of you in this room, and to empower communities to know what they should ask for from their government officials. It has now been endorsed, as I said, by several cities all around the world, and we are right now in the verge of launching a Streets for Kids supplement to this guideline. And one of the cities that we're working with is in Istanbul, the Malpete municipality. Now, the basic premise for street design historically has been the collector, arterial, and local street model. But we have tried to reimagine that in the Global Street Design Guide as a place and people-based approach. And when we talk about designing for people, we need to identify all these different users: the pedestrians, the cyclists, transit riders, motorists, the freight operators and service providers, as well as our people doing business. And because most of our cities that we live in are already built, we cannot just build new roads. We have to retrofit our old roads, and the Global Street Design Guide showcases what is possible on your existing streets. As was shown by one of the earlier presenters, the idea is to flip the hierarchical pyramid on its head and put people, children, elderly, and the disabled at the top of this pyramid. I'm going to talk about only one of the users today, but the guide goes into all these 6 different users. And talking about designing for pedestrians, it's important to identify the different shapes and sizes and the space required by the pedestrians. What are the different speeds at which each of these users move? Identifying all the pieces that they need. We often only design the sidewalk and think that that's enough for pedestrians, but all these different pieces contribute to making a successful, safe, and continuous pedestrian network. The guide goes into the different user geometries to look at the different space and typologies that is needed for pedestrians, because one solution does not fit all. When we talk about a place-based approach, it's important to understand different places and their needs for different types of sidewalks and pedestrian infrastructure. Similarly, there is geometry for all other users, toolkits, as well as networks. The guide uses a before and after mechanism to showcase what's possible on your streets, and has about 100 different street examples under these 5 broad categories, showcasing what streets like this could look like in a sustainable fashion, and making it safer for all road users. Most of these have been built off existing case studies. So the guide showcases about 42 case studies from all around the world with data and processes and how they achieved these safer and sustainable designs on their city streets, like this project from Times Square in New York. Similarly, it looks at intersection transformations, also in a before and after fashion, showcasing what is possible. It's important that we change how we measure success to go from measuring just cars to measuring all road users, and a chapter is dedicated on how to measure and evaluate these street physical projects. The guide has been applied through some of our work in these 5 cities, in São Paulo, Bogota, Addis, Fortaleza, and Mumbai, through policy and guidance, capacity building and trainings, community engagement, and various interim transformations, which are now going from tactical urbanism projects into capital projects, like these projects here in Bogota, which show the data around school zones, neighborhood streets, and the community is asking for these to be made into capital projects. And data has played a very, very critical role in convincing city leaders that these need to happen. So what we urge you is to change the way we measure success from the number of highways and roads we've built to change it to more livable, equitable, and safer streets and cities for our citizens. So we hope the Global Street Design Guide would be a useful tool for all of you. And as I'll end with the motto of our leader, Janet Sadiq Khan, which is change streets to change the world. Thank you.
Sayın NATO yöneticimize değerli sunum için çok teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you very much for this valuable presentation. At the beginning, I don't know whether it was heard, but I haven't seen any answers to the online questionnaire. Maybe it's because of a technical problem, but as I announced at the beginning, today we are organizing a questionnaire in our app, Maruf app. You can go to our session, and we asked 3 questions. What is the biggest problem for sustainable transport? What is the solution? And who should participate in finding this solution or implementing this solution? Who are the stakeholders? So if you kindly answer these questions, I'll be announcing the answers at the end of the session. And if you have any questions to our speakers now, we can take them as well. But I think we have a technical problem with the online app, so well, thank you very much to all our panelists. I have some questions to you, and then I'll be asking the audience whether they have questions. Let me start with Ani. In your presentation, when it comes to new mobility, you talked about new approaches which can be taken as examples within cities. Some of these approaches are new to Turkey. Some of them are already in place. When we look from this perspective, in terms of new mobility solutions, people always think of technological solutions. The private sector bring in this technology, but people sometimes ignore the benefits described in Avi's presentation. So, these apps or the new mobility technological solutions, some innovative sustainable transport solutions organized by the municipality. How can we combine them all? Now that we have the representatives of municipalities and private sector, what kind of recommendations can you provide them so that they bring together all these in a melting pot?
I think I want to make 2 points in what you just said. We did a study a year and a half back looking at new mobility solution across the world. And because it was the first of a study of its kind, asked the question, this new mobility, whether it's bike sharing, whether it's car sharing, or whether it's apps that allow us to move in the city faster, how can we evaluate if this is good for the climate or people? And one thing that we found is that the services that are best or the most impactful are services that allow people to combine different modes of mobility. And mostly when it combines from existing old mobility or existing mass transit with new mobility. So if there is a cycling service that connects to people getting to the metro, has the most impact, or a electric scooter service that you can rent at the metro station. So these connection, or an app that allows you to use multiple modes. So those are the ones that allow. So the answer to your question is cities that you already heard from 2 cities here that are integrating services, old and new, will have the most impact. The underlying thing, I think, is how data is used in a city. Because more data is used as I was saying, as infrastructure, that both public and private sector can use the same data sets, more integration can take place. So my urge will be to both cities, and they're already doing it, is to look at how the data systems, both by private and public, are being used. And as we look forward, that integration will be critical to its success.
Teşekkür ediyorum Ani.
Well, thank you very much, Jenny, for this answer. My second question is to our distinguished mayor. In your presentation, you mentioned the vast bicycle network of Konya. In the last 10 years, the Ministry of Environment also came up with some legislation, and you have built a bicycle master plan in collaboration with the Ministry of Environment as well. Konya has always been an exemplary city for bicycle transport. We heard the Amsterdam example as well. Everything has a starting point. Everything starts with one step. But as Konya is one of the leading cities in this regard, you might also be encountering some problems. I asked this question to the audience. What is the biggest problem when it comes to mobility? So what is your biggest problem in Konya, and how do you overcome this problem? Thank you for this question. So far, our job has been easy because when the main arteries, main streets were designed in Konya, they were designed with a bicycle lane as well. But when you're trying to introduce new bicycle lanes, you have to, as the word suggests, steal from the lanes of cars. Of course, that will lead to some reaction or resistance. That's why we're trying to build some awareness before we do it. The example in Amsterdam was very good. It started with a social movement. Parents wanted to send their kids to school without worrying about their safety. We are trying to trigger such public support and social movement in Konya as well. We have to explain how important it is to citizens. The only way children can have a safe life in a city is to provide them with safe environments, actually. I'm around 45. When I was a child, I used to cycle everywhere, to school, to shopping. We used to ride together with my friends. But now, it is impossible for our kids to do the same in the cities or in urban environments. But in Konya, we see some families sending their children to school by bike. Families are not as worried as before, but Our biggest advantage in Konya is to have bicycle still part of people's daily lives. People still prefer to ride bicycles to commute. And also, in terms of geography, we are quite at an advantageous point because we're a very flat city like Amsterdam. That's why we're lucky actually. Well, thank you very much. Now I'd like to turn to Deputy Secretary General of İzmir. In your presentation, you talked about your transport master plan, and as we can see, it is a pedestrian and people-oriented master plan. You talked us about your plans for widening your bicycle network and pedestrian networks. İzmir has always been an accessible city as well. We know İzmir as a city where people with disabilities have an easier life compared to other cities. So my question is about accessibility. How was the planning process for building a city which is accessible for all? Well, thank you very much. We are not completely an accessible city actually, because it is a very hard job to provide a 100% accessible city. People with disabilities or restricted mobility is a very large population actually. We're not talking about people with physical disabilities. We can also include people with overweight problems or chronic diseases, people using carts to sell stuff, women or men pushing baby strollers, etc. So all of them can be considered as people with mobility restrictions. 2 months ago, we took this problem onto our table once again, and we prepared an accessibility action plan for İzmir. In our municipality, we have 5 working groups. One is working on buildings, second one public spheres, car parks, transport, and access to information and services. These are the different working groups. And all relevant units of our municipality and civil society organizations in relative areas came together in those working groups. And we're conducting some serious analysis work on all parts of the city now. Hopefully, İzmir will become a better accessible city. Accessibility also means a safer and a better city to live in. Thank you. Now my question is to Rory, Distinguished Innovation Attaché. You showed Amsterdam to us, and Amsterdam has always been a very good example to all of us when it comes to using bicycles. When we try to promote Istanbul, using bicycles in Istanbul, we receive lots of reaction because people believe that it's not a flat city, driving is crazy, so people may be crushed by cars, etc. But you showed that it is possible to ride in Istanbul. And you gave an example about how Amsterdam changed in time from a congested city to a better city. We have people in our audience from design companies, urban planners, and we have people also from municipalities as well. So what can we do in Turkey to divert people from using cars to using bicycles? How did you do it in Amsterdam? Thank you very much.
Question. First of all, I think that all of us here agree that in terms of societal challenges that we have, climate change is one of them. Clean air is also one of them. Is that the current situation that the car is the main form of transportation is not sustainable. So we need to change that. I think On the other hand, people are very attached to their cars, so it's also a cultural thing. People expect that there is a parking space for their car. People expect that they can drive from A to B in their car without any hiccup or traffic jam or something like that. So in order to change that perspective, I think it's very important that there is political courage from the local politicians and the policymakers to propose those kind of changes, but also do it in an inclusive way. So involve citizens in that trajectory, in that change, so that people feel engaged in that process. And I think that is what the example of Amsterdam showed, is that there was a citizen engagement in the process of change. And that makes it also easier for policymakers to propose those changes. So I think in terms of how can you formulate that change, I think that there should be a reach out to citizens, to professionals, to experts, to urban planners, in order to propose changes and also implement them. I think that's very important. And I think that's what the case of Amsterdam showed.
Teşekkür ederim Rory. En son olarak
Thank you, Rory. Last but not least, I have a question for Abhimanyu. You talked about the Global Street Design Guide. Well, this guide addresses technical experts. I mean, it's addressed to technical experts, it's addressing local governments as well. So it's an important reference, and covers best practices or good examples. So we are making use of it in our work. So in your presentation, you said it will be translated into Turkish soon. Well, for Turkish local governments and planners like us to make use of and benefit of this guide and to be able to put it into practice locally, what do we need to do?
Thank you for the question. Now, the Global Street Design Guide, as I mentioned, builds off a lot of existing technical documents and expertise. And the idea is to substitute the existing guidelines within city governments. What we have learned from a lot of our work in the Global South is that many cities around the world still have very outdated street design guidance. And a lot of urban conditions are still being designed based on highway design guidance. And the idea with the Global Street Design Guide is to change that. But we know that for all cities around the world, I'm sure including cities here in Turkey, changing local guidelines and national guidelines isn't easy. It's not a process that can happen overnight and sometimes can take many years. The idea with the endorsement campaign of the Global Street Design Guide is that city governments, people like the mayors, people like transportation secretaries and others, can sign off on this document to be used as a permission slip for all the consultants and designers while the manuals are being updated. So it's an interim document to help designers to make change, because if we wait till our guidelines are updated, it might be too late. And the piece is that even the global guide actually acts as a basis for creating new street design manuals. So this, for example, the city of Bogota and the city of São Paulo in Brazil are using the Global Street Design Guide as a baseline to now create their own local guidance, which is based off this. Because every solution in the Global Street Design Guide is not going to be locally suitable to the cities of Turkey. So they have to be adapted for that. And then the final piece around it is that a guideline or a toolbox is only useful if it's embedded within the city agencies. And a very big part of our work is to create trainings and workshops and work with these city agencies and private consultants to embed this knowledge locally within the cities. And that is the idea with creating a Turkish version of the guide so that it's much more accessible to everyone. And as we've started working with one municipality, the idea is to share the knowledge and embed it within local practitioners.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum. Şimdi
Thank you very much. If the technical problem has been resolved, can I get my iPad, or I can just get questions from the audience because we have a few minutes left for questions anyway, so.
evet. Şimdi
Well, now I see the questions. A question to Konya Mayor. So, transportation with bicycles and being integrated with other modes of transportation. What are your solutions? Well, you talked about the bicycle master plan, and it refers to, I think, to that master plan and the integration with other modes of transport. Well, within the master plan, we are trying to integrate with the mass transit. Make sure that people use it together with the mass transit. We have trams, buses, and new metro lines. We're trying to integrate those in the system. So this is an ongoing work. I think I saw a question there about cycle sharing in Konya and how the system will be activated. Well, there's a tendering process. I think within a month we will start to actively use the system. Thank you very much. Ani Bey, there's a question for you. Among modes of transport, we talked about a transition period. It's in English. Well, so this transition that you mentioned, I'm trying to translate in my head at the same time. So this new mobility system and the transition to that new mobility system, does it require radical changes, or shall we have a more smooth transition or radical transition? What do you suggest to new mobility systems? So I think that was the question, I hope. Or, well, it's just you have the written question in English here. In order to make the good choice, do we need to take radical decisions? Is there any soft transition?
Answer to that. One, there is a radical part of it that has nothing to do with new mobility. The radical part, as you've been hearing from all five of us, is how do we build cities that are people-centric and not car-centric. And that is a radical idea because today, as Rory just said, we are attached to our cars. We like it. It's culturally connected. And to be honest with you, every evidence in the world, and all five of us said the same thing, is that in a city of any reasonable size, if we want a livable city, cars don't actually fit there, especially single-passenger cars. Shared cars maybe, but single-passenger. So that is unfortunately, it should not be, but unfortunately, it's a radical idea. It should be normal for us not to drive in our cars to a city. But the transition that I'm talking about, and I think Abhimanyu had a fantastic slide, but if we transition to electric or autonomous, and it's still single-passenger cars, that is no transition at all. I mean, we will have better air quality, maybe better climate. We'll still have a congested city where people will have to live far away, and it will be very, very, very unequal. So I think there is a radical shift which is needed, which I think the technological shifts that are coming can help. But if you're not careful and if you're not intentional about what outcome we want, that technological shift will produce same problems over and over again.
teşekkür ediyorum. Bu arada başka soru göremiyorum ekranda.
I don't see any more questions, and I got the answers to our survey questions. The first question, so in terms of intracity problems, in terms of transportation, what's the biggest problem? Well, lack of integration among modes of transport was the answer. And what's the most effective solution to this problem? That mass transit is accessible to everyone, and who should be involved in decision making. Groups of users, technical specialists, civil society organization, everyone is the answer, should be involved in this process. So we have had speakers from different sectors. We had decision makers, Uğur, Secretary General, Eser. I talked about intracity sustainable practices. We have two representatives from two international institutes working this field. We have the innovation attaché from the Consulate. So, well, to wrap up, we have these problems are going on in our cities. We're looking for sustainable solutions to the current problems. We're trying to be people-focused. And users and cities, well, we should plan everything people-focused. And decision makers and technical experts should not work alone in this process. They should work with users, with civil society organizations, and other specialists before they come up with a solution. So this was mentioned a few times, and I would like to remind you of something. On 22nd of November, we'll have a Viable City Symposium, and central and local administrations and the decision makers will join, and we'll talk about low carbon. Low carbon is not enough. It's time to do zero carbons. Well, you're kindly invited to the symposium. You can register. You see it on the screen. You can, here you see the web address. We'll talk about various issues around viable cities, and thank you very much for contributing to the success of this panel, and I would like to thank the audience for their patience. I would like to thank the interpreters and the technical team for their contributions as well. Microphone, please. Well, there was an app, Q&A. My name is Şemsiye Ercan. I am a manager in the transportation industry. I worked on railways and road transport, and I had been a faculty of member on European economy and transportation at Istanbul University for 14 years. Well, there was a United Nations meeting on transportation in Austria, Vienna, and there are resolutions. The resolutions have been adopted during this meeting, which are quite explicit. In transportation, they talk about cities, things to be done in cities, and there was a Bridge for Cities meeting or panel, and they talked about creating joint welfare, increasing economic power, and protection of environment. So there were several headings were discussed, and they talked about environmentally friendly technologies and their transfer, industry adaptation, eco-industrial parks being built, environmentally friendly technologies being developed, clean energy for efficient use, and industry energy efficiency and climate policies and their networks, and multilateral environment agreements and their implementation. So all of these were discussed in the United Nations meeting. I have this document. It's also public. It's online. And they had a table round joined by government representatives. You see all of these principles were adopted already. So we have to also discuss those resolutions in such a meeting. Yes, bicycles are nice, but our basic issues are mentioned in the resolution that I've mentioned. In the United Nations environment meeting, they're no longer talking about carbon dioxide, but greenhouse gases mostly. And in terms of, we are number 2 in terms of greenhouse emissions after Europe, and so we have to take into account these aspects. Izmir Municipality and others, they are trying to do something, but mayors sometimes say it's not in our power to do all of these. So maybe all the municipalities should join forces, or political parties, Ministry of Industry, the government should sit together with them. The speaker is waving the microphone around. We can't understand parts of his comments. I would like to apologize for that. Well, these are important topics for municipalities as well. So we have to discuss the United Nations resolutions in all of your work. Public, municipality, industry, government, they should form an alliance to solve all of these overarching issues. Why aren't we discussing those main aspects, but only, well, then we talk about, we're trying to get rid of petroleum and fuel. But it's quite prevalent still, and proponents of these fuels, of these energy sources, they're walking freely around and, well, having a bearing on all of our work. We have to focus on these subjects more. Microphone, please. They're being discussed quite inadequately in summary. Thank you very much for sharing your input with us. We ran out of time. The purpose of Maruf is actually to bring together decision makers, technical experts, and institutional institutes, technical specialists to discuss these issues and to make use that the discussions are implemented and how to implement those. So we are trying to pioneer this as well. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience.